All right, so yes, I'm Sarah Bartlett, and I'm with the Psychology and Child Development Department, and I'm here with Sky Bergman, who's with Art and Design, and we're here to talk about some research on intergenerational service learning in the time of COVID-19. So just really briefly, this is research going on in psychology of aging, which is an upper division major elective and GE course. And service learning, particularly intergenerational service learning, is a pedagogical strategy that's used oftentimes in gerontology classes to basically expose students to the world of aging and to help them apply what they're learning in the classroom in a kind of real world context. And it also has a lot of benefits for older adults because it provides interaction with younger generations, and social isolation can be alleviated when students go out and participate in these programs in the environment. So the project we're going to talk about is called the Lives Well Lived Project, and it's based off of a film that Sky beautifully created with the same name, Lives Well Lived. And I had a student alert me to this movie, and I went and saw it several years ago and just fell in love with it. It's just such a wonderful example of successful aging, which is this concept that older adults can still be actively engaged and really involved in their communities. And that's exactly the kind of image I'm trying to portray to my students to counteract a lot of the negative stereotypes that they have coming in. So using Cal Poly's Learn by Doing motto, Sky and I created a program where we send students out into the community to different assisted living facilities. And we formed a project around the concept of living a life well lived from Sky's film. So before we talk more about the project, Sky is going to talk about the film itself.
So if you can go to the next slide. The film that I created was really out of a love of my grandmother, who at the time that I started the filming was turning 100 years old and still working out at the gym. And I was looking at approaching 50 and wanting to live like she did. And so I set out, and you're going to go to the next slide, to interview 40. I found 40 people, and I took 4 years to interview 40 people that were 75 to 100. So 3,000 years of collective life experience. And you can go to the next slide. And what a gift it was to turn off all devices and just really listen for 4 years and make those connections. Next slide. And one of the things that I found was that I learned so much. It wasn't just about their words of wisdom, but also about their stories and their legacies. And next slide. But the most important thing was really the connections that I made to these people. And I kind of took that for granted because I had that connection with my grandparents. And you can go to the next slide. And so when Sarah approached me about doing this project, I thought what a great gift this would be to incorporate the film, which kind of sets the stage and is the catalyst to create these connections that happen. So you can go to the next slide, and I think you could take over from here.
All right. Wow, that was lightning fast. Thanks, guys. So the Lives Well Lived project was born, and basically what it involves is 5 service learning encounters per quarter for each class. And in the first one, when we do it in person, we have the students go out to a local retirement community, and we all watch Lives Well Lived together. And then Sky does a question and answer, and we have kind of a meet and mingle time. And then after that, I randomly pair 1 to 2 students with an older adult, and they meet 3 times throughout the quarter. And these are some pictures of some of these interviews. They interview one another using the same questions that Sky used to interview folks for her film. So the questions revolve around living a life well lived. So proudest accomplishments, regrets, words of wisdom, advice, all kinds of pretty deep topics. So these dyads or triads tend to get close pretty quickly. The students also take what they've learned and they make a memoir for the older adult that they give them as a gift. And then Sky would do a professional photo shoot where she would take these great photos of the pairs or the triads. And then that really just kind of brought out that physical example of these relationships that were being formed. And then at the end, we'd have a wrap party, and the students would give presentations, and everyone would sort of celebrate the end of the project. So when COVID hit, we had to pivot like many people have, and we took the whole program online. We joined with an online technology community for seniors called Senior Planet. It's a program of AARP, and everyone would watch the film on their own, and then we'd have a virtual kickoff. We'd still match students with older adults, but they do it all over Zoom. And then we would have a wrap party over Zoom as well, We obviously couldn't do the professional photo shoot, so we settled for screenshots, but tried to recreate the same sort of program. So what I'm doing research on is to see if the virtual program is as effective as the in-person version of the program in terms of increasing knowledge about aging, changing attitudes about the aging process, and reducing ageism. So I previously did a study where I compared the Lives Well Lived project to a less involved service learning project that I'd previously done in my classes. And it was shown to be more effective in a few areas, but now we're trying to see, can this be duplicated virtually with the same amount of success? So if you want, I can email folks the PowerPoint. I have like a full literature review. I have information on the research design and the data analysis. I'm basically doing a pre-test, post-test with both some scales measuring the constructs I just mentioned, and then qualitative questions to kind of get a feel for why and how the students think the program might be working for them or not. So I have all the results from the in-person version in the slides, but what I thought I would do today is just skip to some of the preliminary qualitative results. So you can see some of the quotes here. This is from the virtual version. I'm collecting data all academic year, and then we'll review it in aggregate this summer. But as you can see, like one student said, it was a great experience getting to know the older adult I was assigned to. I liked the fact that I could form a real connection with an older adult without dealing with all the social factors of not being able to socialize with an older adult. So as you all probably remember, older adults were one of our most isolated groups during COVID-19 because they were so susceptible to COVID-19. So this was a way to get around that, and everyone, including the older adults, really enjoyed having this interaction. Students also talked about being able to socialize with someone in a different geographic location. So because Senior Planet's virtual, there were older adults not only in California, but in Colorado, New York, Wyoming, Alaska. So students thought that was pretty neat to get to know someone in a different area of the country. And then I really like this quote here. The student said, aspects I liked were being able to connect with someone else during the pandemic and having the opportunity to learn about their life experiences of another person. So sadly, some of the students said, and it's also joyfully, I guess, too, some students said this was the first new relationship they'd formed since COVID started because they were isolated, they were with their families, they were in asynchronous classes, and so they really enjoyed just having the chance to get to know someone kind of at that level of relationship. So other students, you know, they wish that it had been in person, and we hear the same thing that they're saying about their classes. I mean, obviously we all wish that we were in person. So we'll see if that was a real barrier to having the program be effective. So just in conclusion, previous research I've done has shown that this Lives Well Lived project does offer additional benefits over kind of a more limited service learning program. It really comes down to relationships, to the relationships that are formed. And so I hope to find out soon if this relational element is achievable in the virtual format. So here's our contact information. Like I said, I'll have more information on the results later this summer, so feel free to reach out to me or for the PowerPoint. And I have Sky's information there too, as well as the link for the film. So thank you. Did I make it?
You did, and you have a minute to spare. So
wow.
about the full 5 minutes for questions. Most of the comments in the chat were very positive. They weren't questions, however. So, you know, that they, you know, appreciated the links and all the photos in your PowerPoint. So, so that for that. But how about questions?
And I should say too, all those photos are courtesy of Sky. She's an amazing photographer, and the students loved getting their photos taken at a professional photo shoot, as did the older adults. I mean, it was really fun to get to see that aspect of it. So that's one part we miss in the online version.
I'll ask one question, which is, what kinds of impacts on students or the elderly are you comparing in the pre and post COVID, you know, the virtual versus the in-person? I know you had their impressions of, you know, liking the opportunity, but I was just wondering about other kinds of aspects, kinds of things that you're going to try and compare.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a scale that measures knowledge and not just like factual knowledge, but whether knowledge is tainted by bias. And so that's called the Facts on Aging quiz. And so I'm going to compare if there was a similar reduction in net bias between the two groups. So that's for the knowledge aspect. And then for attitudes, there's a really old scale that's been used a lot that measures like what kind of attitude shift do students have about aging? And it's mostly like cognitive, attitude based, and see if there's any difference between the two groups on that. And then for ageism, there's one specific aspect of ageism called, it's basically stereotypes. So it's kind of looking at, can people get past negative stereotypes and really form a true connection? And that was one of the few significant results from the quantitative data from the first version of the program. So seeing if that shows in this version of the program as well. So that's what I'm trying to compare. And then also looking at if some of the qualitative themes that came up before come up after. So.
It looks like Dr. Thomas has his hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. This is a very interesting presentation. One of my areas is life course and as it relates to physical activity and healthy development. And so I'm interested in, I think, the assessment part of from the student's perspective. In that stage, are there plans or could you tell us a little bit more about the wrap-up presentation? And then could you share if there are plans around creative forms of reflection and expression that you have not yet used?
Sure. So for the wrap up party, they do, well, this is one thing that's changed in the in-person version. When we had a little bit more time, they'd have a 2 to 3 minute presentation, and it's centered around 3 main questions. The first one is, what did you learn or what did you take away from doing this project? The second question is, what is your definition of a life well lived? And then the third question is, what is the older adult's definition of a life well lived? And because the project kind of centered around that theme, we thought it was important that students really walk away with having really developed some kind of an answer, at least for right now, of what that means to them. And it also kind of shows the depth at which they interacted with the older adult. So that's for the presentation. In the online version, we've had to shorten it just a little bit to about 1 to 2 minutes, just because we feel like people have a harder time sitting on Zoom for as long as they might in a physical location, but they're basically still touching on the same topics. And then what they do for reflection throughout the quarter is every time they have a service learning encounter, they write a reflection paper where they talk about their observations, thoughts, and feelings about the interaction, and then they have to tie it back to at least 2 course concepts that they've learned in the classroom. So they do that kind of ongoing throughout the quarter. There was one other aspect to your question, Dr. Thomas.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity for a two-parter. Could you tell us any ideas that you might have for creative expression? So beyond presenting responses to the 3 questions, are there other creative modalities that you're thinking about or that you've considered as a kind of summation of their experiences or what they're taking away related to those questions?
In terms of takeaways, probably not. It's mostly the term paper and the presentation. Where their creativity really shines is in the memoirs. So they do get to take what they've learned about the older adult and create some kind of a project that they give to the older adult as kind of a thank you for the interaction. And I've seen a ton of creativity come out with that. So it started out the first time I did this as a pilot project, I just kind of told students, I'm not very creative. So the first thing that came to my mind was, oh, take a copy of the transcript from the interview, type it up and put a pretty cover on it. And the students actually taught me, about the creative aspect of this. And somebody said, well, can I do a scrapbook of their life? And can I do a digital scrapbook? How about, I'm a poet. Can I write a poem that encapsulates their life? And so I just started saying, sure, bring it on, whatever modality of creativity works for you. And we've had original paintings. We had a student record herself playing guitar and singing a song that the person enjoyed. So it's been kind of all over the map. So I guess in terms of creative expression, it's been more through this memoir gift for the older adult. So that's been nice, but I'd be interested if there's another way to take that creativity and harness it to apply to what they've actually learned from the class too. That would be great.